So we're going to start to talk through now and discuss the main key considerations with a deadlift variation. Now, we've got one bias towards the glutes here and one bias towards the hamstrings, and it all comes down to the positioning of the knee and the hip through the hip flexion that's going on at the moment. Now, if we were to bias a deadlift or an RDL or whatever you want to call it through the hip, we're going to be placing more load through the glutes. If we were to bias it towards keeping the knees a little bit more extended, we're going to place more load through the hamstrings, a little bit more advanced with that movement. Now, just like we did if you switch back to the power squat variation of the hip dominant movement, where we looked at the difference between glutes and hamstrings, and even the 45-degree back extension video where we looked at the difference between glutes and hamstrings and the change in intent, we can do the same thing here. So at the start, Luke's going to now go into more of a hamstring dominant hip hinge. Now, first key consideration, a lot of strength and stability through the spine, shoulders are locked, lats are switched on here. They're creating a lot of force to hold that bar in place and hold the spine in place. He's going to think about keeping his knees a little bit more extended through this variation and shifting the hips back. Now, if you look at where Luke's placed the bar here, he's pulled the bar a little bit further forward, which creates a bigger moment to the knee, which create a little bit more lengthening through the hamstring. And as he comes down, the hamstring's going to lengthen, knees are relatively extended, and he's going to shift the hips back and then through. So we're loading the hamstring through lengthen range, don't surpass that degree of hip flexion available, push the hips through, there. Now, if we want to bias more glutes, we're now simply going to create more hip flexion and more knee flexion. So a slight bit more bend in the knee, and we're going to shift the hips back even more. So now we've created a greater moment arm from the force, the line of the force here, and the hip pushing further back, lengthening the glute, and then driving through. Now, this exercise for the glutes is great through mid-range and lengthen range here. We're not going to get a lot when that hip gets closer to the bar. So what we can do here, and you'll see this in a lot of programs, is as Luke lengthens the glute, pushing the hips back, we've got a lot of load. And now if you pause there, Luke, we're going to have a band wrapped around his waist through this position here. And as he extends the hip, that band's going to constrict, and it's going to provide a more torque through hip extension, which means that we're having a greater challenge through the glutes.